All right, we'd like to welcome all of you out to our public hearing today here in Logan. We're delighted to have you with us, and we hope that as we talk today, you'll understand a little bit more about the role of the Independent Redistricting Commission, and that you'll be able to provide us with information that helps us better understand Logan and Cache County, as well as the other surrounding counties. We are happy to have Mayor Holly Daines with us today. We appreciate her joining us. And I do want to note one correction on one of the handouts. The Logan handout, the data on the Hispanic or Latinos is incorrect for 2020. The correct number,
the Asian number must be wrong as well.
Yeah, the correct number for Hispanics is 7,980.
Same on the Cache County map. Wrong.
Yeah, the Cache County one, the comma is in the wrong place on that one. So it's 15,000, not 1,500. And the Asian is 1,433.
I think on our webpage, you can look it up and they'll have the right figures on, so.
Yeah. So, and the two or more races just is 1,849 for your reference. So, again, welcome to the hearing. We're delighted to have you join us. My name is Rex Facer. I'm the chair, and I'll introduce my colleagues as we go through this process of telling you a little bit about the commission. Let me make sure I get back to my notes to make sure I don't miss anything. So I want to tell you a little bit about the commission and how it started. In 2018, there was Proposition 4 that was passed by the voters. The proposition was then refined through a legislative compromise in 2020 through Senate Bill 200. That compromise made a number of changes to the legislation. Probably the most significant is it placed the commission in an advisory role to the legislature. The understanding of the legislature was that it was their prerogative under the Constitution to oversee redistricting. And so they wanted to be able to make the ultimate decision. And so the commission now will produce a set of maps and deliver those to the legislature, along with a report and an oral presentation to let them know about the work that we've done and the perspectives of the citizens that we've engaged with over this process. The commission consists of 7 members. We have 6 of us here today. We excused Commissioner Rob Bishop, who had a funeral to attend. But our 7-member commission is made up of 3 who are appointed by the Republican leadership in the legislature. 2 of those are partisan appointments, and that's my colleague Lyle Hilliard, who most, if not all of you, are quite familiar with, as well as Rob Bishop was the other partisan appointee on the Republican side, and then Commissioner Jeff Baker is appointed as an independent by the Republicans. On the Democratic side, we have Commissioner Karen Hale and Commissioner Christine Durham, who are appointed as the partisan appointees, and then Commissioner Bill Thorne, who was appointed as the independent. And then I was appointed by Governor Cox as chair. One of the things that we're really proud of is that we've worked together in a bipartisan way, and we have not seen the kind of partisan divides that you've seen some places across the country. And that's one of the things that we're very proud of. Our charge is to produce a set of maps for the state of Utah. And we want to produce maps that are useful and will promote a healthy conversation to make sure that the people of Utah are well represented in this process. We were established and appointed back in February. We then went through the process of organizing the commission. Since the commission didn't exist before, it was a new creation, creating essentially a new state agency. And there were some learning curves as we went through and tried to figure out how do we go about hiring somebody, among other things. But we're grateful that we've been able to hire some terrific staff. We have an executive director, Gordon Haight, who's with us. We have a number of our staff who are also with us. We've been really creative in the way we've utilized our staff compared to the way other commissions across the country have been staffed. Normally, in about April, we would receive the census data, and we would then be able to shortly thereafter start doing our mapping. Well, because of the pandemic and other factors, the census data was delayed, and we didn't receive it until the 12th of August. And it then took about a week and a half or so to get that data into the software that we could use to actually start drawing maps. So since late September, late August, excuse me, we have been feverishly drawing maps. Now, what we have done is we have created 3 map drawing teams. Each of those teams consists of a member who is appointed by a Republican and a member who is appointed by a Democrat as a general principle. And so we have 2 of our teams who have 2 members and 1 team that has 3 members. So the 2 member teams are Commissioner Lyle Hilliard and Commissioner Bill Thorne, and then Commissioner Karen Hale and I. And then our 3-person team is Commissioner Durham, Commissioner Baker, and Commissioner Bishop. And so when you look at our website, you can see the maps that the commission has drawn. Now they're labeled with what may seem like strange monikers. They're called orange maps or purple maps or green maps. That's simply the identifier that we gave to the teams because we didn't want to call one of the teams Team 1 to make it seem like that team was the first team and the other teams were second best. And we didn't want to call them letters because that might get confused with grading or something of that nature. So we settled on colors, and we purposefully chose colors that were not associated with political affiliations. We also tried to stay away from ones that had football connotations as well. Although the folks at Weber may have gotten lucky, because we do have a purple team.
Purple, that's right.
So we have been, again, spending many, many hours, and I really want to thank my colleagues on the commission for their commitment. Commissioner Hilliard has driven down probably 3 or 4 days a week for nearly a month, and then spent, often 8 to 10 hours mapping. That's a real commitment on his part, and our other colleagues have been spending similar kinds of time doing this mapping. And one of the things that we think has really helped us is by working on this mapping, we think we now are much better able to understand the comments that we're receiving from the public. It means a lot more to us when we've struggled in trying to figure out how to create boundaries that make sense. And we aren't offended if you come up and say, I looked at your maps and I think you've done the worst possible thing ever. But if you're going to tell us that, what we want you to tell us is how to fix it. So if we've split Logan and we've split it north-south on 4th North, tell us if you think that was a bad decision, and tell us that it would have been much better to split it on 4th West or 4th East or wherever it would be better to split it. And we'll take that information, we'll go back and we'll try and see if we can make that work. Now, there are times when we've gotten comments from the public hearings that we've been able to go back in our mapping teams and make changes to accomplish the things that have been suggested. There have been other times where we've gone back, taken that, worked it, and finally said, we can't figure out how to make that work. But we will give it due consideration in this process. Now, after we have we're starting to get to the point where we're narrowing down to our 12 maps. But even once we have those 12 maps, we'll still be doing refinements up until nearly the very end of this process when we submit the maps to the legislature on the 1st of November. So we're essentially 2 weeks out from having to have all of this completely finished. And lest you think that these maps are a done deal, many of us will be back drawing maps again on Monday, trying to take into account the feedback that we've received on public hearings in the last couple of days. We'll also have some public hearings next week. And again, we will be taking that information, trying to see, are there ways that we can tweak the maps to make sure that we're reflecting the information that we're hearing from the public. Now, one of the things that differentiates the work of this commission is we have a set of statutorily defined criteria. Well, I should say statutorily articulated criteria, because they aren't necessarily defined in the statute. And we've had to go through and try and define what those mean. And so I want to walk you through the set of criteria that we have to give you an idea of the things that we're trying to balance as we're making mapping decisions. So the first criteria, and the criteria that everybody has to use, is the criteria of equal population. So each district shall have equal population, and there is a possibility to have some modest deviations among those population differences. But we're really targeting, especially at the congressional level, that's where we probably feel the most pressure to hit those targets precisely. So for congressional districts in the state of Utah, we have to have a target of 817,904 people in each district. Now, we can technically have a deviation up to about 817 people, plus or minus either way. So it's 817,904 plus or minus 817 people. But again, the signals that we're receiving from the legislature is that even though we technically can have a population deviation of 817, they're aiming much more tightly at that 817,904 number. Now, for the other three types of districts, state house districts, state senate districts, and state school board, the window on the deviations is a little bit wider. And so for the state senate, our target is 112,814, but we have a wider possible deviation up to plus or minus 5,640. Now, again, most of us, as we started this map drawing process, it was the numbers that were driving much of the conversations that we were having. But as staff has come back to us, they have reminded us that there are other criteria that we need to balance. And so if we have a deviation, we need to be able to justify that deviation based on the other criteria that we have. Yeah. Now, let me give you, for the state house, our target is 43,622. And for the state school board, it's 218,108. Now, those other criteria that we have that we're balancing against this equal population are things like contiguity. No part of the district can be entirely separated from the remainder of the district. And so we can't say, I have family that used to live in Smithfield, and that's actually where my grandparents are buried, and I'm looking forward to driving up there a little bit later today. But we couldn't take, say, Smithfield, skip North Logan, and put Smithfield with the city of Logan. That wouldn't work because they're not connected. If we're going to have Smithfield with Logan, it would have to include North Logan as well. And so that issue of contiguity is important. So even if we can make the numbers work perfectly by excluding North Logan, we can't do that and just use Smithfield and Logan together. Another criteria that we have is the criteria of reasonably compact. Our criteria says the district should avoid odd shapes or contortions that can't be explained by other legitimate redistricting criteria. Now, one of the things that you will notice when you look at some of our maps, you'll look at them and you'll go, boy, it looks like there's some really odd shapes. Now, most of those odd shapes are driven by our municipal boundaries because we've tried to keep cities whole. And if you look at our city boundaries, they aren't nice straight lines all across the way. And so when we've kept those cities whole, we've then ended up with some oddly shaped boundaries. But those odd shapes can be explained by the criteria that we have to try and keep cities and counties whole, which is another one of our criteria. We also have a criteria around communities of interest. Now, communities of interest is a group of people in a contiguous geographic area that share common interests. Those interests could be cultural, they could be religious, they could be social, they could be economic, they could be environmental, but they can't be based on a relationship with a political party or a candidate, because we aren't using information about incumbents or parties in our map drawing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But what we've done on these communities of interest, we've been out and about asking people across the state to tell us about their communities of interest. You can go on our website and our staff will show you, how to do that momentarily. And you can draw a community of interest for us. And we take that data and we're then combining it with all of the other community of interest submissions that we have. We have over 1,000 submissions of communities of interest. We've grouped them in about 9 different categories: economic, neighborhood, social, cultural, ethnic, just a variety of criteria or a variety of categories. And we can now map those and see those on our maps. And so we can then use that to help us see where those communities of interest are. Now, again, we don't have any way of knowing for communities outside of the ones that we live in, what those communities are. And so it's critical that we get your feedback on where those communities are. So where we've divided a place like Logan, does it make sense? Do we split communities up? I know Commissioner Hale and I, when we've been trying to decide where we split a community, we've been looking at things like, well, do the houses face each other? And if they do, if we can avoid it, we try not to split it there and try and find a place. But that's a relatively crude way of defining these communities and neighborhoods. It's much better when you tell us that here's the exact neighborhood. And there are some cities across the state that have very well-defined neighborhoods, such as Provo, and they actually have the boundaries all drawn out for us. And so we can look at those and compare those and try to minimize splitting those neighborhoods as best we can. But if we don't know where those neighborhoods are, we won't be able to make any choices about how to split more appropriately a community when it has to be split. We want to try and preserve geographic boundaries. And so if we have things like rivers, so I know Commissioner Hale and I, when we were working in Northwest Cache County, we were trying to decide where to draw a line in a few places. And it made sense to us to use one of the streams that were flowing because that naturally divided some of the community. Now, you may look at it and you may tell us, well, that was a really bad choice. It would be better if you use, say, the railroad tracks. Well, we need to have that feedback to help us, because for us, we were trying to use these criteria that we have, and they may not always necessarily fit the local context. And so again, getting your feedback is critical for us. The other things that we're looking at, again, I want to mention, we're trying to preserve and keep cities and counties whole where possible. But there are some cities, for example, Logan has a population of 52,000 and change. And you'll note that for a House district, we're looking at about 43,000 people. So Logan is by default going to have to be split. Now, the question is, do we create one district that is all 43,000 people in Logan? Or do we create a district where Logan has about equal halves? So there are about 26,000 in each of those districts, and we pick up the remainder in one of the other communities. we need your input on which of those strategies resonates better with you as a community. Would you rather have one representative that represented the vast majority of your community, and then have a second representative that only represented a small portion? And so what would be better for Logan? Those are some of the kinds of issues that will be very helpful for us, because while we want to minimize splitting communities, there are times when they have to be split by their very nature. And then there are going to be times where they have to be combined. So at 52,000, Logan isn't big enough to have its own Senate district. And so where are we going to come up with the other roughly 50,000 people, or I guess 60,000 people, to make a Senate district? Do we want to go north? Do we want to go east? Do we want to go west? Do we want to go south? What makes the most sense? Those are the kinds of feedback that are really helpful from the community. We also, where we can, we want to try and make our boundaries agree. So Commissioner Baker has been very good about helping us understand that there are a whole host of reasons why we want to do this, not the least of which is to make managing elections feasible. And so if we can have lines that are consistent across Senate boundaries and House boundaries and state school board boundaries, it makes managing elections more straightforward. And so we're looking at that. Now, part of the problem is that we can't just nicely nest all of our districts together, because we have 75 House districts, 29 Senate seats, and at least when I went to school, I couldn't divide 29 evenly into 75, right? And now, if we had 25 Senate districts, we could easily divide that into the 75 House, and we'd have 3 House seats for every Senate seat, and we could neatly nest things together. But we don't have that. The other challenge is we could nest our 75 House seats into our school board seats, but the problem is that we have school boards, local school boards, and we want to try and keep those as intact as possible, that don't necessarily easily line up. And you're very familiar with that, here in Cache County, where you have multiple school districts within the county. And so we're trying to do this, and we're trying to keep it as clean as we can, but it's not quite as nice as being able to neatly stack all of the districts on top of each other. The last criteria that we have is around purposeful or undue favoring. And I'll just read our statement from our criteria. The commission will, to the extent practicable, prohibit the purposeful or undue favoring or disfavoring of an incumbent elected official, a candidate or prospective candidate for an elective office, or a political party. And the commission will not use residential addresses of incumbents, candidates, or prospective candidates in creating its proposed maps. So we've made a decision that we're not going to be using political data in drawing our maps. And we hope that that process decision keeps us from unduly favoring or disfavoring candidates, elected officials, or political parties. This actually, we had a rather robust conversation last night about how we evaluate how well we're doing on that criteria, and we're going to continue to struggle, I think, with that issue over the next week and a half. But we know it's an important criteria, and we are clear that we don't want political data influencing the drawing of our maps. And so we have clearly decided to not use that kind of data in drawing our maps. So that gives you a picture of the broad set of criteria that are driving the map drawing decisions of our commissioners. Now, you can go online on our YouTube channel, and you can watch the map drawing sessions of our map drawing teams. And it may not be the most invigorating theater you've ever watched, but it is transparent and it is honest. And that's one of the things that is very important to us, is we wanted to be transparent with the citizens of Utah how we were doing our work. And we've made all of our decision-making open to the public. And so we think that's really important and highlights that we want these to be the maps that that resonate with the people, and the people feel strongly about the maps that we're drawing. Is there anything else that any other members of the commission would like to add at this point?
Can I ask a question? You gave
Yes.
us deviations for the Senate and Congress, but you didn't give it the deviations for the House.
Sure.
Or for the school board.
Sure, I can do that. So the deviations for the state house is 2,181. And the deviation for the state school board is 10,905. You bet. All right. Yeah. And we're happy to have, as we just have, a fairly open conversation. And we will have an opportunity for some formal public comment. But the commission has, in all of our meetings, wanted to be engaged with the public. And so when you make a comment, don't be surprised if a commissioner wants to ask you a follow-up question, because we really want to understand the issues that you're bringing to us so that we can incorporate those into our thought processes.
And our report.
And our report. So one of the points that Commissioner Thorne often makes, and so I'm going to steal his thunder, is that the comments that we receive, whether we're receiving them on our website, whether we're receiving them by email, or whether we're receiving them in the public hearing, this is all part of the public record. And we're going to take that public record into our report so that those comments are reflected to the legislature, so that the legislature gets to hear everything that we're hearing. And so, for example, we were looking at some of the maps that and comments that we've gotten on maps, and we've gotten over 1,000 comments on these individual maps that we've been drawing, in addition to the 1,000 comments on communities of interest. And so we've had thousands of people being engaged with our map making process, trying to help us improve our maps and to make them better. And we're very grateful for that. And we're especially grateful the more specific those comments are. Now, I want to ask staff to come and share a brief presentation. And Joey, is that you today? All right, terrific. If that microphone doesn't work, try another one.
We're trying to get it up here. And can we get the microphones turned on?
Yeah, just give me this one.
Test. All right.
Okay.
Okay, so I just want to give a brief presentation about our website and how you as the public can get involved. If you go to our website, right up here, it's UIRC.Utah.Gov. It'll take you right here. If you go to this participate tab, there's a few different ways you can participate here. You can map your community of interest. And there's a tutorial on exactly how to do that. That's if you don't want to map the whole state, but you say, hey, this is my block or this is my neighborhood and I don't want to be split up. Alternatively, you can map the whole state of Utah if you're up for a challenge. It's a pretty daunting task, as Commissioner Pacer said. There's a 10-minute tutorial here that can help you through it. And if you run into any issues, you can email us. Our email is UIRC.Comments@Utah.Gov, and they're also on the flyers. If you just want to give a regular public comment, you can go down here and there's a form, or you can email us at that same email, UIRC.Comments@Utah.Gov. Another way that we're collecting public comment is by getting feedback on the commission's draft maps. So if you go to the main page right here, you can see the different options of maps. So for instance, if we go to congressional maps, you can actually view all of the commission's draft maps, and you can comment on them. You can say, hey, I don't like this map, or hey, I do like this map. And so you can zoom into your community. Real slow today. The cool thing is you can zoom into your community and click through them, and it'll stay in the same spot. So you can see what every single individual map does to your community, and you can see the same thing on House, Senate maps. You can see exactly what each and every map does. And then on this left, there's a public comment form. You can fill out this, say you really like this map, put your information. And like Commissioner Kaiser said, be detailed, explain why you don't like it or why you do like it. And that feedback is really helpful to the commissioners. The other thing that you can see here is our events tab. All of our public hearings, you can find here, you can Zoom links if you want to attend one virtually. I think we have 2 more, one in West Valley and one in Harriman. And then all of the information of any other meetings we have can be found here. So this is our website. There's lots of ways to get involved, and it's really important to us because no one knows the community better than people that live in it. And so we want to get feedback from locals throughout the state so that we can make sure that the commission has the best maps possible. So does anybody have any questions on the website or anything I can answer? Okay, sounds good.
Now, after the hearing, if you want to see the software up close and personal, staff would be very happy to walk you through how the software works, how to read the maps, all of those kinds of things. Gordon.
Again, we're really here today. So what we'd like to do is each comment, if you give us your name and if you represent a group or city or that would be helpful, and first, last name. And the commission is the final engage with the agreement comments. And again, if you would like to stay afterwards and see the software and really kind of understand how the map is going. So I'd like to turn the time over to you. We'll have a map right here. Yes.
So Gordon is our executive director, and we're still training him on keeping the mic close to his mouth. So
Yes. If I mumble, I will restate that we do want to hear from you. So if you could just make sure you give us your name and anybody you represent, that would be really helpful for us as we put the comments out on the website. So I might need to speak.
And we would like to particularly invite Mayor Daines, excuse me, if you'd like to make a comment, we particularly invite you, but we also invite all of the rest of the public. So if you'd like to go first, we'd welcome that. Or if you'd like to, we'll leave it to the mayor's prerogative. So.
Could we put that map up on the proposed map up on the screen again? Logan, as you mentioned, specifically has a challenge because there's no way to include all of Logan. And I'm assuming that urban and rural would be appropriate commonalities that you could consider looking at. When I looked at the maps previously, and again, if we can pull it up, I'll refresh my memory. But it seems like there was one map that included Logan with a great deal of Minden and Denson. That was one that to me just didn't seem to make a lot of sense because again, Logan has much more of an urban sort of feel, and Minden and Denson are much just agricultural, they're more of a rural area. And it seems like there were some options that, it seems like Logan has more in common with Providence and North Logan and Hyde Park that way. So again, that seemed like a little bit more logical way to structure that.
And what kind of map?
Right there, probably the congressional. Well, and then, state house. Maybe it's more state house and state senate. Again, so many different options. But I think those comments in general apply. Certainly some larger districts, that doesn't make as much difference. But when you're talking particularly House district, I think that's probably more appropriate. Again, it's a larger area. At least state senate, again, I need to differentiate. So again, the challenges are overwhelming. I commend all of you for putting so much time and energy into this. So thought the dividing line was, yeah. Was there one that went more north and south? And I can pass this on to someone else if others have particular.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much for that comment. And I know it's a pain, but it would be really helpful if you went onto the website, identified the map, and then appended your comments to the specific maps that you're thinking about. Because we'll get those comments and we'll actually get them as we're mapping. And they'd be very helpful.
I'll ask that because I wasn't clear how you stated your community and then flip through all the different maps. So I'll ask that question later. So.
And we have several versions of each House map, and each Senate map. So the more specific you can say, I like this
Yeah,
one
that's the orange and the
because of this, or I prefer this one because it doesn't have this. That would be helpful for us.
Anyone else?
All right, who would like the mic next? Yeah.
My name is Nathan Holt. I'm a retired lawyer, past and present friend of Lyle's. I was curious as to why you're preparing 3 maps of each of these different sets. If you have any criteria for evaluating the 3 maps, or if you're just going to throw them out to the legislature, there are 3 to choose from.
Yes, please.
Let me just give you an example. I think a big part of our purpose in recommending or identifying 3 maps to the legislature for each of the categories, congressional, state legislature, and school board.
That's by statute.
Yeah, well, yes, it's also by statute, as Commissioner Thornton reminds us. But we have a lot of debates on which of the criteria need to take priority in a particular division. And one of them, for example, is the way we treat congressional districts. There are some who have a strong philosophy that rural and urban areas should be included in the same congressional districts for reasons of representation. There are others who believe that the interests in those arenas, urban versus rural, for example, are so different that they don't belong in the same congressional district. So in probably, I don't know yet, but probably when we select maps, we will offer versions that follow one philosophy and versions that follow another.
Also, let's see, can you hear me? All right, am I on? Perhaps.
There's a little switch there. Oh,
Thank you. Also, you were asking about the maps and is there any analysis of those maps? And we have an incredible staff. We also have hired great legal counsel who have also helped us as we analyze our maps, just to make sure that we are following federal guidelines, our statute, and the Voting Rights Act. We need to make sure that we are adhering to all of those, but looking at proper redistricting, and are we redistricting in a fair way and something that encompasses all of the criteria we've adopted. So we have great staff. We have these other folks who are helping us analyze the maps that we've all been working on. And they'll do all sorts of different types of analysis on these maps. For instance, how are we doing on keeping counties together? How are we doing on keeping cities together? Are we compact? Are we contiguous? All sorts of different types of criteria. And we're really looking at our maps in a very disciplined way. And we are having conversations too, as we get to this point in time now, where we are starting to narrow down now our choices for the maps that we will be submitting to the legislature. And so so we take into consideration, okay, what were our grades on these maps? How are we doing with this criteria? How were we meeting the mandate that we had? And so we're making those selections. And so we will select our top 3 maps from each different type of map. And those are the maps that we'll submit.
Let me give you another example. It depends where you start. So if I start with Rich County and then move around, I can only go south or I can go west. I can't go east, I can't go north. So then I put that district together, and as you start going across the state, it has ramifications, whatever you do. If you look at these maps, you show that Cache County has 133,000. Fox Elder has 57,000. That's not the 224,000 that we need for 2 Senate districts. So we add Rich County in there, and it's about 1,000. So we're still short. So where do we pick up population to these counties so that the northern 3 counties can have 2 Senate districts and fill out? And historically, we've gone down to Summit County in that area when I was first elected. We've also gone into Tuolumne County on the west. Currently, we have a House seat that goes into Weber County. In fact, one of the presentations we heard, the person had Hiram in Wellsville tied in with Huntsville and North Ogden. That was their proposal. And so it really begins where you start now. Commissioner Thorne and I, after we were in Park City, from that area, Summit County is about enough for 1 House district. But traditionally, they've been really split up. It's kind of where as a surveyor say, where the earth curves, you just can't put it together. And so they wanted to have, one proposal was that Park City should be joined with Salt Lake because they're not like East Summit County, to which a county commissioner stood up and said, nonsense, we're all the same, put us together. So when Commissioner Thorne and I started, we tried that 2 different ways. And the problem when you take Summit County and put it into 1 House district, what do you do with Rich County and Morgan? Then you have to blend Rich into Cache, and you have to blend Morgan into Weber County as you just try to work these out. And it's the numbers that drive it that make it really, really difficult to do. And so Commissioner Thorne and I started different places, and the maps will all look different because it's how you make the decisions as you go up. But the other thing that's really difficult, it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. I've been told there's 77,000 census blocks. And everything we do has to fit in a census block. In other words, say we look at an area of Logan and the census block says there's 140 people living there. We can't say, well, we only want half that number. Let's divide it. We have to use that block. And that becomes very difficult when we're putting the matter together. I want to add another thing. I happen to know where a number of the legislators live personally. I've been to their homes. I've never mentioned it. I think Bill Thorne will tell you, I've never mentioned it to the committee. And so if somebody looks at it and says, well, what about your compadre? I said, that doesn't even come into the bearing. We look at the lines and the numbers and we've learned a lot. For example, we were in Moab the other night and they said, hey, south part of into Grand County, into San Juan County, all the kids there come to school in Moab. They don't go to school in San Juan County. So if you divide it, that line right there between San Juan County and Moab or Grand County, you're going to have a section of people there that are really a community of interest with Grand County and time. And so you try to measure all that out because like they said, the county clerk in San Juan County has to prepare ballots that cover the people there, and so does Grand County. So we've been working closely with county clerks saying, give us something that really makes sense. And it's really a challenge. Right? This is one of the most difficult challenges I've had in trying. I love jigsaw puzzles. I love puzzles and doing it. But as you get through it, and then you have to step back and look at the forest and not the trees and say, oh, that doesn't look very good. And as you try to work it out. But I think there's a feeling from people that I've heard from that we're going to snap our fingers and have some really beautiful map that everybody's going to see come by out. And I'm sure that the 7 here could sit down now with all the work we've done and draw probably 2 or 3 different maps of each of the area. And every one of them would generally fit the criteria. It just didn't really put the balance. But we need to know from you on these lines where we go. For example, I have some people come and say, Cache Valley is all the same, put it all in the same district. Well, I would say it is, but we heard from Holy Things, Logan is a little bit different than Benson and Mendon. And what about Summit County? East Summit County, Colville, Hennepin, Camas, are they the same as Park City? Park City would say no, but they're all in the same county. And so I think I've been here long enough to look at all the maps, and every district you put, I can show contrasts in the district. You're not going to get a district, even with 43,000, that's exactly the same community of interest. It just doesn't work out. So we're just trying to do the best we can, not being tied with any political ties to what we want to do. The maps that we want to present would be based on numbers and these other criteria we talked about, but not who lives where or how they voted in the last election. And I think that's really a can of worms you try to figure it out when you look what Romney did and then what Trump did. Who were the Republican voters? I mean, I don't even want to get mixed in that because I think it's been an outlier what we're doing. We're just trying to do, and again, I would agree the avenues, I would agree Sugar House for community of interest. I would agree cities are generally community of interest, so we got to keep them together. And that's what Commissioner Thorne and I spent 2 full days just working school maps, trying to keep cities together. And so, for example, when you can't put a city together like Logan, how do you do the least amount of damage to the city? And some would say, well, you can divide it into 3 districts and give enough in Logan that they could elect the representative of all 3 districts. And I think that's not what we want to do either. We want to make sure that each person has at least some say in it. I can't do a lot about Rich County with 1,000. They're not going to have a state senator. But so Nathan, that's really kind of the background why there's so many different ones. And we're required by statute to do 3. I would prefer to do less than that. I would also prefer to be able to look at the map and say, it doesn't make any sense because this district is 100 over, but I have to move 100 out of Logan City over into another area just to meet the numbers. But especially the congressional districts, it's been pretty clear, if you don't have equal numbers, you're going to be sued. And then you got to go to court and you got to explain why you took those 100 out. And maybe you could get by, but if you do too much of it, you're going to be a long time in court. And that's the tragedy of this whole process, is that we didn't get these figures until the middle of August. We really couldn't start until the 1st of September. We have to be done by November 1st. We'll have, that's why we spent so much time working on this, because the legislature has to take our recommendation. They will then decide whether they accept it or how they accept it, and they're going to have a special session probably before Thanksgiving, because they have to have the maps all in place and approved before January 1st, when people start running for election and go out and get signatures. You have to know where your district is to collect signatures. So that's the time frame that we're under, and we'll do it. You know, would we use more time? Sure. Would we spend more money? Sure. But I think the commitment of the 7 here, and it's basically volunteer work. The driving back and forth that I've done for the mapping thing with Commissioner Thorne, I enjoyed working with him. I didn't know him before, but he's been great to work with. And I think we've had never any disagreement, at least any political disagreement. It's always been, where should this line go? And he suggests, or I suggest, we work with that. So I've been very, very pleased. And if you really want to be bored, go turn on that YouTube and watch us for 8 hours. Go lines and streets and maps. Thanks.
Please.
So my name is Amy Anderson. I live in Logan and I'm on Logan City Council. I just had a clarifying question. When you're looking at these different colors, is the intent then that like purple would be chosen or orange, or is there going to be a mix of the different maps? That's just a question first.
So it is possible that we could, yeah, so purple just designates that it was drawn by the purple map team, which is Commissioner Hale and I. It is theoretically possible that we could have 2 purple maps and an orange map, or we could have 2 orange maps and a green map. So we aren't limited to only having one of each color.
So, and then a comment, in looking at
That also reminds me, thank you, Commissioner Baker. Or it could be that we use two of our maps and then a submission from the public, because we're also evaluating those. And if we like one of those better, we have no reservations about using a public submission.
One of my concerns as I looked at some of the maps was just the geographic spread. So for example, in the Orange Congressional 2, it picks us up all the way from Nevada and then goes all the way down to southern Utah. And so when we're looking at communities of interest, that one is a little bit troubling to me in terms of just the north-south. Southern Utah and northern Utah do have very different issues with traffic and, kind of that urban-rural divide. So just, and also one of the Senate maps, the state Senate maps, the same thing, looking at that one, as far as whoever would be elected, having to cover from Rich County all the way down. So I'm assuming you're taking that in consideration too, just how well a representative can do that if they have such a large geographic area.
Thank you for that question and comment. Is this on? Okay. You touch on a major point of discussion for us. And those dilemmas are because of the numbers. I mean, you have huge tracts of land in the state of Utah with very few people in them. And then you have very concentrated areas of population particularly in the northern counties. And so trying to get districts which will get the right numbers, particularly when you're dealing with those wide open tracts, can be very difficult. And it turns out you're going to have to travel long distances to get adequate numbers in some districts. But it is something we think about and talk about and try to deal with.
So one of the public maps that we've seen, I think we actually may have seen 2 or 3 variations of this, where they've created 3 congressional districts that are relatively compact along the Wasatch Front. And then the last congressional district is essentially a ring around the outside of the state. So Logan and St. George would be in that outside ring, as would be my good friend Commissioner Hilliard says Grouse Creek would also be in that district, as well as down south to Blanding and Mexican Hat. And so as we look at that, I think most of us, we have not taken a vote on this, but the consensus that I've been hearing is that most of us think that that would be an unreasonable burden to place on a legislator to try and just physically have to manage that geography. And so, but as Commissioner Durham says, that there is some challenge because we have very large spaces that have relatively small populations in parts of the state. And so how we balance that is part of that art that we're struggling with. But so you raise an important issue that we are paying attention to and struggling with.
Yeah, I was going to say, just a comment, for some House districts and Senate districts, I mean, we'll have to put together several counties. I mean, we're talking just, how would we divide Logan into, 2 House districts, but down in the southern half of the state.
Yeah, Wayne, Garfield.
We're having to combine several counties just for a House district.
Hi, my name is Christine Holt, and I live in North Logan. As a citizen who voted for the proposition to make this commission happen, I was thrilled when I won that election, and subsequently distressed by the legislature kind of taking it over, in my opinion. And I admire everything that you're doing. I think you're doing a superb job of considering how the state is constructed and what's the best thing for the state without getting politics out of the process, which was the whole idea of having an independent redistricting commission. What I'm worried about is what happens when you turn this into the legislature in November. Do they have the right to just completely ignore everything you said? That's what I thought. Yeah, and they can just say, oh, well, next Nice job, guys. Okay, see you later. I'm really concerned about that.
You're correct, they can. But what we're hoping in making our work so transparent and in preparing and publishing our report, which is going to contain our rationale for the choices we made and the decisions we made along the way. And our hope is that the public nature of that information will encourage the legislature in their process to deal with it and to be prepared to respond to it in some way if they reject it. Now, that's going to be their decision. We have no control over it, but we're hopeful.
What can we as citizens do to keep this in front of the public?
Well,
And make sure-
talk to your legislators, and what else can you do as a
Well,
citizen?
I think, that's the first and most important thing is to reach out to your legislators and tell them, you want to encourage them to pay attention to the work of the Independent Redistricting Commission. The other thing that you can do, you can write opinion editorials, you can email your friends, have them do it. Encourage people to go to our website, make comments. The more comments we have, the more public support that shows. I'm reminded of the shampoo commercial in the 70s where the person told two friends and they told two friends and they told two friends, and the screen fills up and all of a sudden you've got thousands of people. And we hope that that's part of the message that goes out, is that you tell two friends and they tell two friends, and you're all calling your members of the state house or the state senate and saying, hey, pay attention to the good work that the commission has been doing.
Maybe the complexity of the work will sort of be in your favor, because you've spent months and, and hours on this. How are they going to come up with a different decision in a pretty short space of time? So hopefully that will help reinforce your work.
They have a lot more staff than we do.
Let me share just another concern I have. And that's the fact that we hear about the public support of what we're doing. This is probably one of the biggest meetings we've had. We've been all over the state. We've had meetings in the St. George area, and Roosevelt, and Salt Lake, and all those areas, and we get very few people who come. And actually, staff tells us when we're doing our drafting and have our meetings, there's probably less than 30 people who turn in and watch it. And I suspect many of them are paid to do so because they're with other staffs and looking at what we're doing. And so I can tell you, obviously you are very interested here, or you wouldn't be here. Appreciate that. We're very interested, or we wouldn't spend the time we spend on this. But the problem really gets to be the public support where it's going to be. And I would have wished you'd had 500 people here. All of them saying this is really important to us, so we think that ought to happen. But so that's the challenge you have. And again, I think when we get all through, we're going to all agree that all the different maps work. It's not something, one thing you can do and bingo, you have the right answer. But I'm fully accepting that when we're through, nobody's going to like us. Because everybody's going to look at that map and say, oh, look what you did to Moab, or what did you do to Salt Lake to find that? And so that's the challenge you have. You just have to think in your mind, and I really appreciate getting to know this commission and working with them, because I think every one of them here has the honest intent of doing what you wanted done when you passed this initiative.
Do you mind me asking how many public comments have you gotten? Do you have a tally of the number that have come in so far?
So, Soraya, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that I believe we've received over 1,000 directly related to the draft maps. We've gotten over 1,000 of the comments on communities of interest. And that doesn't include any of the email comments.
Most of them say they don't like what we've done.
Do they have a better idea?
No.
Some of them, but there are also, it's not uncommon for somebody to say, I don't like it.
Some say they strongly agree with the map.
Well, yeah, and some do say they strongly agree with the map, so.
And I don't think there's any expectation from the commission that we're going to have a perfect map. But we are firmly committed to having a fair process, creating different maps with different orientations, where partisan politics did not play a part in where the line was drawn, where incumbents or candidates live was not a part of that decision process. We don't know what the end product is going to look like in terms of how it's going to affect an election. But what we can tell you is the process was done without politics, without partisanship, and without worry about where incumbents are. So it's as fair a process as we can make it.
And I do think, as Commissioner Durham suggested, I think it is important for residents to remind their legislators about the proposition that it did pass throughout the state. And it's important, and that many of those legislators who will be voting on these maps also supported an independent commission. So we hope that the legislature, in good faith, will look at these maps and will seriously consider the maps that are submitted by the independent commission.
Does
Okay.
our existing maps fit the criteria of population or not? Like the ones that are holding today for elections, if you just kept those same boundaries, would they need to change no matter what?
That's right, because the patterns of growth have shifted. So even though, for example, Cache County has grown at about the same rate as the state as a whole, there are individual parts of the county that have grown faster or slower. And so that causes it to have to shift. And then you've got the whole issue of the rapid growth in the southwestern Salt Lake County, northwestern Utah County, and St. George that is pulling it. They need to have more representation down that way.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify, because you can't just keep it the way it was.
I'm told that the fourth district is 60,000 too many. So the fourth district, if we did that, we'd have to move 40 or 60,000 people out of that district. I'm also told in Salt Lake County, the north part of the county has not grown as fast. So there probably will end up one state Senate seat out of North Salt Lake County being moved to the south end of the valley because of the growth in airmen in those areas. So that, I think, gave me answers to your question.
We've got a comment back here, please.
Hi, I'm Eric Benjamin. And I'm, as someone who supported this process as well, thank you so much for being on this panel and for representing kind of a different avenue for citizens' voice. I understand the statutory requirement that legislature do what it does, but this is kind of a nice, I like the transparency, the angle that this is, you're representing the citizens' voice. But I don't think underestimate the important work we're doing, right? Just, you know, maybe you're not seeing that people in seats, you're getting the letters, the matching. I think for me, as an educator, I know Senate districts and congressional districts get a lot of the headlines. Look particularly at asking look particularly at the school. And there, I think communities, you know, shared interests are going to be really important because we have high school leaders, right? And we certainly have parent interests in different areas that may be distinct from others, and to try to do our best not to divide districts, for example. Try to keep those communities of interest together in those school board districts. I guess, not saying that you're not paying attention to that, but I want to make sure in the room that we're thinking about students. Sure, those interests are represented. And I've heard over and over again in this room that it's fair, transparent, that we are looking at those criteria, and I just really appreciate that. So again, thank you for the work here.
Thank you. I would just note that we don't necessarily know where those communities of interest are and what they consist. So we're looking forward. We understand that the UEA is preparing some maps for us to look at affecting the school board, and we hope that's going to be really helpful.
And I want to say thank you too. It's been wonderful to have educators attend our meetings and voice their opinions about the state school board districts. That's been really important. Our executive director has reached out to superintendents as well throughout the state superintendent, as well as local superintendents. So we've been using, in some of our mapping too, we've been using the maps for our local school districts. And so we've been trying to keep those together as much as possible as we look at the 15 school board districts. So, so we'd love to hear more input from you. And again, it's tricky with numbers to try to do that, but we really have been conscious about trying to keep those local school board areas together.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sandy Goodlander, I'm just a resident here in Logan. And I don't know if this is an appropriate thing to do at this meeting, but I wondered if you could bring up the maps for just the state house districts that affect Logan. Well, we have these people here in the room. I want to look at what your 3 recommendations are. Have you got those?
No.
We can see where those boundaries.
So, yeah, we can show the maps, but we have not narrowed it down to the 3 final maps yet.
Okay. I'm just really curious, especially the difference between House District 3 and 4, and what some of the different options are for.
Yeah. How many do we have? I think we have a lot.
Okay, this, I can study on my own.
No,
That's fine.
let's bring one up. I think that's-
Yeah.
Sandy, let me tell you, one that we did is horrible to Cache County because we started with the Summit County. And then we had to build around that as we came up north. And so we ended up cutting Cache County, and I just, no way am I ever gonna vote for this. Because I know how impactful it be in Cache County and Box Elder. So as you look at them, don't get a panic that we're suddenly, I mean, the basis that we did. And what Kurt Benjamin, this response on the UEA and school districts, Commissioner Thorne and I sat down and tried to take school districts and build our base on that. Because every county has a school district. Some like Cache have 2. We have Logan and Cache, Weber and Ogden. But you really run into problems when you do this. When you get Davis County, they only have 1 school district. And then you go to Utah County, and they have Alpine on the north, Nebo on the south, and Provo. Those are all bigger than any school districts. And so you have to do some cutting and dividing to try to get them out. It's not very hard to take Cache and Rich and Logan and Box Elder and put them all in one. You just have to find others to get your numbers to build that up. So we've looked at it and tried to do it, and that's I think you'll see that and say, as long as you do a deviation, a big deviation, it's easier to do it. If you don't do a big deviation, it gets really difficult. And you never know. I don't want courts to decide our decision. I don't want this thing tied up in court litigation back and forth because it just delays and we have time. We have to meet deadlines to do things. So I think we're trying to comply with as best we can. One other thing I was going to mention to you, because it was raised about the miscount of Hispanics there. Under the Federal Voting Rights Act, we cannot make a district based on race. But after we do our districts, they look at them and see, have we discriminated or disadvantaged minorities? And so we have an advisor to us, a law professor at Stanford, who's done a lot of redistricting. He's looking at it very carefully to make sure as we do this, that we don't disadvantage. But one of the issues we have is, I would suspect that there's a number of Hispanics who are not registered, not in the census. And there's no way we can go back and try to put them in, because if we did, we'd never see the end of the line. Everybody would want to modify. We are stuck with the census figures we have as we do that. I know we had one group of Hispanic people came and said, well, there's a whole group of Hispanic people here in Ogden haven't counted. And I said, well, it's not in the census. I don't know how we ever count. But we do have an obligation under the federal law, and we do follow that we'll make sure as we finish up our districts that we have not discriminated or hurt a minority district and how we've gone about it.
So Joy, can we go ahead and pull up a house map? You can pull up,
My bad one.
yeah, pull up purple too. I think that's
Well,
a safe.
and while
one.
they're doing that, I would just mention that Commissioner Hilliard's comment about, what to take from the sample maps that are up there. Some of those are the ones we did at the beginning, in the middle of August, when we first got the data, before we'd even had any public hearings. And I have one that I participated in back in that era that I won't vote for either. So you don't have to take them as having any particular weight. They're really samples at this point.
And as Chair Facer said, as we began this meeting too, the input that we get from you today is really important because we'll be going back next week and we'll be modifying our maps according to the input that we've had here today too. So thank you for all your help.
If you'll go up to Logan.
Oh, sorry.
We learned last night in our meeting in Layton that the city is, I think Clearfield, they said, is the second largest city in Davis County. And redistricting 10 years ago, it's divided into 4 districts and not one representative from Clearfield is in the legislature. So those are the kinds of inputs that we learned. And I know I haven't gone back and looked since the meeting, but I know that's something I'll look at Monday.
And as you're looking at these maps, understand that the numbers don't correlate to existing districts. It just happened to be the order in which this map was created.
So, but before we completely finalize them, we are going back and trying to, it's best we can, to renumber them so that there is some similarity where possible to the existing district numbers, because we know that can cause some confusion to folks. So again, what we hope to get out of these draft maps as much as anything are additional comments that help us make them better. And so we're willing to take the arrows, so to speak.
And we've taken a few.
Yes.
Well, how soon would you have your 3 recommendations for the legislature? That would be interesting for us to be able to say, okay, of the 3 that you have that you're going to recommend, because it looks to me like there's just so many different iterations of what it might be, so it's hard to give input on so many different ones.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we're hoping early next week that we'll start to get close to the 12 total maps. In part because we have to have them and a report delivered by November 1st. And if we don't start figuring out what those 12 are pretty soon, we won't be able to make our deadlines.
What's the best feedback we can give you? Look at this and say, I hate this map because of what, I'd rather do X or Z.
Yes, yep, that's exactly the
Or you
kind
drew the
of.
line here and it makes more sense to draw it here instead. And tell us why.
But each of the maps that are there represent the proper population. You split it correctly.
Yes.
It's a different idea.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if it's possible, but I know Nathan was asking about analysis of our maps, and I didn't realize that Cassidy was here, and I'm wondering if we could just have her just in 2 minutes
Explain.
explain to this group her work and what she does when we complete a map.
Okay, so some things that we do that are really helpful for the commissioners is number 1 is we take the existing layer of what cities have been designated as by the cities themselves. Luckily, like Utah has it, like geological or geographic, not geological, wrong. Anyways, and they give us that information. So I put it into a program I wrote and said, okay, if I overlay your district map, this is how you split up these cities. And this is in what chunks you split up the cities. So for example, when they first started mapping, often on the congressional map, they would unintentionally split a city 3 times. And I'd go back and say, splitting a city 3 times is ridiculous and you only have 4 districts. So like maybe a 2 split depending on how big the city is, but go back. And they also do that for the House and Senate. So that's one thing we really focus on. Because some city boundaries are really strange and don't necessarily make sense, right? So it's good to get that information to them. We also do that for counties and for school boards as well.
So that way the commissioners are informed about where they're splitting things and can be more intentional. Because it doesn't always happen the first time as you're trying to figure out what happens with population. And as Chair Facer discussed earlier, these numberings aren't finished yet. So another thing we look at is called cores of prior district. What that does is it looks at, okay, what percent of this section of the map was in its old district and now where does it sit in the new district? So that way we can look and say, okay, most of District 3 used to belong in a different district, let's maybe renumber it to the district that reflects a little bit better. So that way people feel like their community has somewhat stayed intact when it comes time to vote. Like, oh yeah, I'm still in this district, like, I feel comfortable. And I think that's important because as we saw earlier, when we pulled up these maps, we all were like, oh, that's not my district number, I don't. So we're looking at that as well. So those are like some of our major analyses that we do. And we also compare across map, we look at compactness, how well we're doing with those scores. A lot of those scores are ranged from 0 to 1. And a lot of other entities will show you different analysis on maps. But it's important to remember because the way Utah is in its geography, there's some things we're not going to score super well on. So that's why we find it really important to compare to the maps we've created thus far, so we know what we can achieve. And we're working with some outside groups that are also going to create what's called an ensemble of plans. And those show us the maps we haven't drawn. And those will compare to things that we didn't think about. We'll say, okay, here's what you can do in the best way. So how few city splits you can achieve, or you can achieve a ridiculous amount. And this is how many plans can do that. So that way we can see where we fall and things we haven't considered. So those are some of the analyses we look at.
And that information that Cassidy gives us, Commissioner Hilliard and I would go back and we just spent many hours redoing our school board map to try and keep cities intact. So we take that feedback and then we see, okay, can we do this? And for some, we've split a city 4 different ways. Maybe we can get that down to 2. Or maybe this small city we can keep intact. But with that information helps inform us as we go back and take a look and say, yes, we can do this, or no, it's just not going to work here. But at least we'll try.
Thank you.
I don't know which map that is, but that's not one that'll ever pass my vote.
Yeah. Hmm.
I didn't take a close look at the screen before, but do your maps have dates as to when they were drawn so we can see the progression of the commission and working on these maps?
So
Yes.
Joey, you can describe the numbering system on the maps.
Yes, let's see that. So if you go over here and so we don't necessarily have dates of when they are, but we have the different drafts. So if you look over here, for instance, if we go to congressional, each team has a specific number of map. And so for instance, we have orange 2 and 3, which means they drew 1 congressional map ahead of that, but decided they didn't like it and went forward with 2 and 3. So that first number, the orange congressional 2, explains which number of their map it is. And then the draft 3 describes any changes they've made. So that means the orange team has gone through 3 times after they have proposed that map and made changes to it. So there's not any specific dates of when stuff was changed. You can always go back and look at again, our YouTube channel, and you can see all that progress being made. We label it exactly what color it's mapping and what map they're working on our YouTube channel. But that's what those numbers represent. So the first number is their number of map, and then the draft is how many different times they've changed it since they proposed it.
Are there any other comments? Okay. Not hearing any, I'll go ahead and close the public comment portion of this meeting. I want to remind the public that after we're done, feel free to go over where Joey is and he can show you more about the maps and make sure you know how to access the software, among other things. we have the possibility of discussing map refinement, but I think we did sufficient of that last night. So I think we'll pass on that section. Is there anything else that any member of the commission would like to raise? Not hearing any, is there a motion to adjourn?
No one can leave until after 12:30.
Okay. For the commission anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, motion to adjourn.
All right, yeah, this meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you very much for your attendance. We really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.